Welcome, action fans, and thanks for joining us for a special, planned at the last minute bonus episode of the show. As unlike last time, we could not fit our end of season awards into our season finale, because it turns out there is a lot more to talk about Copland than there is The Patriot. Who would have thunk it? Anyway, if you've not listened before, you might at this stage be thinking, who the fuck are you? Well, I'm one of your hosts, Scott Murphy, and as always, joining me is screenwriter, 1/3 of the Bloodhound Picks podcast, and Stallone's personal horse steroid supplier, Mr. Craig Draheim.
I'm ready to finish this season up.
It's time. It's time to move on from Stallone. In this episode, as well as giving our kind of final thoughts on Stallone's 90s filmography, we will be handing out awards in the following categories: Best Film, Worst Film, Best Villain, Worst Villain, Best Stallone Performance, Worst Stallone Performance, Best Action Set Piece. Here's a swerve. No worst action set piece. We're not doing that. Best end credit song. Again, we're not doing a worst. And best one-liner. Last time, not doing a worst. So we're going to do them in reverse order and work up to best film, because I think that's the top category. That's what the Oscars usually go out on, isn't it?
Yeah.
Apart from this year, the weird, it doesn't matter. We'll not get into it. Anyway. So Craig, we're going to head up with best one-liner first of all. And this is, and I did specify to you on Twitter that this is best Stallone one-liner, because as we've discussed throughout the season, the best lines in most of his films were given to other people. In the case of Demolition Man, Wesley Snipes. In the case of The Specialist, James Wood. In the case of Assassins, Antonio Banderas. In the case of Judge Dredd, Armand Assante. It's just a thing. So it's a Stallone one-liner we're going for.
Okay. Yep. Originally, before I got that, I had all of the Armand Assante, the whole, what did you get? Oh, just the meaning of life. Oh, what's the meaning of life? It ends. Or him talk about the law, or, his very famous law, that whole thing. So Armand,
you want chaos? I am chaos.
Yeah. So I just want to give a special shout out for that, because in terms of one-liners, he just delivers.
Yeah.
But I think I'll still, because that movie is chock full of so much trying to have like one-liners and trying to be, I guess, maybe sell the action figure or whatever it is that feels like, because it's based on a comic book. I am going with Judge Dredd when there's kind of the two, when he is sentenced and he's upset about it. He said, I can break the law. I am the law. And he's doing that. Yeah. And also his kind of repeating of the, I knew you'd say that. And
of catchphrase throughout the movie, which is kind of intermittently funny. Like sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. It's kind of weird. Yeah.
I also love, but it's not necessarily, I don't know if it's really a one-liner. I love that ending bit with, in Copland where he says, I can't hear you, Ray. But it's not, but I don't consider it really a one-liner like I do.
Yeah, it's not like a kind of zinger. It's just, yeah. It's a good line. It's delivered well.
Yeah.
So I had a few contenders. I mean, like, I do like the, I am love, I like, it's very funny. That entertains me. There is a scene there's the happy birthday scene in, Assassins, where like Antonio Banderas is talking about how it's his birthday, when they're having the share in the kitchen. And, it's not a great line, but the way like Stallone delivers it is quite fun, where he like just lights 2 matches and goes, happy birthday, asshole. It's kind of generic in a way, but like, I like the way he delivers it. And, there's something puntastic about the line in Demolition Man where he kicks Wesley Snipes' head off, and just before that he says hands up, which is, that gave me a wry smile. But my favorite one, I think, is the one at the end of Cliffhanger. That's what I'm going to give my best one-liner to, where he says, "Remember, shithead, keep your arms and legs in the vehicle at all times." And then he just kicks the helicopter, and the helicopter falls down like 4,000 feet or whatever it is.
And you see John Lithgow doing the kind of weird squeal brace for impact thing that he does.
Yeah, that's...
I think I forgot to mention this. Another great, it's not really one-liners, but I can't think of her name now. Sandra Bullock gives kind of a great like back and forth. Yes. Yeah. That needs to be highlighted for Demolition Man.
Oh yeah, that's right. Like, yeah, I think like there's so many good ones there. I can't remember how exactly she says it. It says something like, "Oh, you really made his meat and we, and licked his ass," and it's oh yeah, and it's like, dear. The funny thing is, like, Stallone's good in Demolition Man, but like he is just overshadowed by Wesley Snipes and Sandra Bullock in that film, because Wesley Snipes is so cool in that film and Sandra Bullock is so adorable in that film that they are the shining stars of Demolition Man.
And that's what we kind of found. I mean, we'll talk more, I guess, throughout it, but that's what we found almost throughout the season, maybe with the exception of like Copland or Daylight or I don't know, maybe a couple others, but for the most part, it's like there's him kind of, the big thing we've talked about is like him being at a 6 or, whatever the number may be, and everybody else just cranked up to 11.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, I think, like you say, Daylight, he's probably the strongest performer. Copland, he is nearly overshadowed by Ray Liotta, but he's definitely, he's definitely either second best or joint best with Ray Liotta. And I suppose it's kind of difficult because you're always going to look kind of better being in the showier role, and obviously Ray Liotta's got the kind of showier part. So, don't know. Like, I still think Stallone's possibly my favorite thing in that movie. Although Ray Liotta's, it's a very close run thing, and he just plays his part perfectly, and it's dialed down, but it's dialed down for the right reasons, not just because he looks bored. So yeah, it's great, and I think he comes pretty close in Cliffhanger. He's definitely one of the best things in Cliffhanger, even though the villains, and often it has been the case in this season, much like in the Seagal season, that the villains overshadow our lead action hero. Although, I mean, it should be pointed out, obviously, Stallone is a far superior actor to Steven Seagal. So we roll on now to best end credit song, because we had a kind of run of them of like, the catchy end credit song. So so what did you think on this one?
So this one was, I guess, probably the easiest one for me to pick, and it was just the Dread song by The Cure, which, just because I'm a huge fan of The Cure. I also really like the Demolition Man by Sting. I'd probably say those were my two, but just because I'm a Cure fan, I'll choose Judge Dredd.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good one. That's a good one. So I was kind of between three. I wasn't sure. I'm going to be different, because Dread Song is definitely one of my favorites, and I was kind of between three. So, but just to change it up, just so we're not, awarding the same things all the time, and because, I'm going to give a lot of the best to a particular film, as we will see. But it was the three songs. It was Demolition Man by Sting, that theme, the Dread song by The Cure, which I think is a really nice song. But just to be different, I'm going to put my best end credit song to the end theme of Assassins, which was the Rolling Stones cover of Like a Rolling Stone, because I'm a Cure fan, but I'm also a fan of the Rolling Stones.
That's a good one.
Yeah, I thought I'd give it to that. I think it's a really good cover.
No, I agree. Yeah.
So that was a pretty quick. Yeah, I suppose there's not much more to say about that.
No.
Like that was a pretty quick category. If you're listening to the episode after listening to the episode, check out those songs. All 3 of those songs, very good songs and well worth a listen. So we roll on to a more important category. We are an action podcast, so we should be talking about action. So, right, we're going to do best action set piece, any of the movie.
Okay, so I chose, while we talked about this, again, off recording, so the production design element and everything, and the sets and all of that with especially Judge Dredd and Demolition Man I love, but in terms of action set piece, I actually had to go with Assassins, and there's a ton actually in Assassins, between Antonio Banderas being Wolverine and just taking a beating the whole time. So I chose, the taxi car fight where you just see them trying to shoot at each other and kill each other while they're like separated by this bulletproof glass, and then Antonio Banderas is being smashed into a bus. Yeah. And it's just, the whole thing with Antonio Banderas, each part he's in is an incredible kind of action set piece.
Absolutely. I think there's 2 absolute standouts in that movie. And like Assassins, in a way, you might pick this up if you listen to the Assassins episode, but in a way is the most frustrating movie. Yes. Of all, because like Assassin starts real well, and the first 45 minutes of that movie are, I know there's the kind of internet chatting thing that kind of slows down the movie, but for the most part, the opening kind of 45 minutes or so of that movie are real fun, and there's some real good action set pieces, and just kind of in the second half of the film, it really slows down and pacing's off, and it's just, the life is kind of drained out of it, and it becomes a slightly different movie as well. It picks up this kind of more serious tone, and it's just a very uneven film. But 2 of my favorite action set pieces do come from Assassins. The one you talked about, the taxi ride scene where, Stallone is in the taxi car as the character Robert Rath, and Antonio Banderas' character is in the back, and then they're having, these quippy banter back and forth, and he gets squished against the bus, and then Antonio Banderas rolls out the taxi at some point, and then there's a continuation, there's another car chase with the police for a little bit as well. There's a really good action scene. And then my other favorite action set piece from that particular film is the kind of happy birthday scene, in the flat, where they're having the shootout in the kitchen, and Stallone blows up the kitchen, and Banderas gets fired out the window, to no effect. To a little effect. He needs to have a warm bath afterwards to kind of, recover from his wounds.
Yeah. He needed a lavender bath bomb, and that's it to heal up.
Yeah. So it definitely has 2 of my favorites. We discussed the fact that Copland isn't necessarily wholly an action film, but the shootout and the end of that is great.
Yeah.
So that's a great set piece. I think the finale of Demolition Man is really good. The fight between Snipes and Stallone at the end of that, the cryo prison, I think that's done really well. But just for the sheer insanity of it, I think the best action set piece for me doesn't actually involve Stallone. It is the mid-air heist in Cliffhanger.
Oh, yeah, that's
because the stunt work in that is mad, and it's just, it's obviously kind of done practically, and they got to die to do it, and all that, and it's just a really well done bit of action, and the other great bit of action is the opening scene, the failed kind of mountain rescue with Stallone. That's also pretty fun as well. But, you know, the mid-air heist, you got a bit of a shootout. You've got this insane stunt work of the guy, you know, on a wire from one plane to the other. And it's just, I mean, how they did that is really very technically impressive. And it's just a really exciting piece of action cinema. And so that takes my award for best action set piece. Although, like you, I'm a big fan of the taxi car scene in Assassins as well.
Yeah. And I mean, that's what we talked about with Cliffhanger, you know, for anybody that didn't listen to the episode that's listening to this first, which you should probably listen to the episode first.
Go listen to go back to the start of the season, listen to the Cliffhanger episode, and then work your way through, and then come back here and listen to this rundown.
And so we kind of talked about was that, like with Cliffhanger, those two opening or kind of stunts action sequences, and then the rest of the movie, as great as it is, you know, it didn't live up to those elements. And that's what happened I remember a couple Stallone films. It was like you had these amazing... It
kind of happened with Daylight as well, because you have like that scene where he's going through the fan system to get, down into the tunnel. And like, that's really, really fucking tense. And that's, really exciting. And you're like, oh man, is he, obviously he's a hero in the movie. Obviously he's going to make it. But you do suspend your disbelief in that scene. And, and I think it's, even though it's a kind of comical touch, as we discussed in the episode, the fact that each kind of fan that he goes through has like these giant timer clocks on the side of the walls. It's a silly touch, but it also makes it more exciting and more tense. And, but then, there's nothing else. None of the other set pieces work as well as that, or as exciting, or as tense as that particular scene.
And what's so great about the fan one too is that it's not, like, I think about, can kind of be compared a little bit, since they came out around the same time, to the Mission Impossible, where he's dangling and going through the wires. Yeah, it came out in
the same year, 1996.
But with that one, the Mission Impossible, even though there's him almost falling or the sweat, it's all smooth and like kind of choreographed. With that fan one, I think what works so well too is that it is so clunky. Like, you're really watching him squeeze through, and he's slamming around, and there's...
I mean, do you think... I mean, I get that. I get that. I mean, I think that is partly down to the fact that one film is directed by very problematic Rob Cohen, and the other film is directed by Brian De Palma. So that might make the difference.
Yeah.
In terms of its slickness.
But it works to its benefit, I guess.
For sure. So, we're just, I mean, usually we're going off on tangents.
Yeah, we're doing pretty well today.
We're sticking on script today. Like, it's, what's happened to us? We've become disciplined all of a sudden.
It'll change right when we get back to
it'll
Russell.
change. Yeah, when we move to the Kurt Russell season, I'm sure it'll change again. I think we're being extra disciplined today because we know, this is a spoiler alert, for the listener. When we start the Kurt Russell season, Craig won't be able to make it on the Backdraft episode, but he will return on the Tombstone episode.
Yep.
And as we are both convinced that episode is going to be a sprawling mess, we're trying to be extra disciplined on this episode. So, in order to keep that going, we will roll on to our next award, which is Worst Stallone Performance.
Yeah, so I think this is kind of when we start moving on to...
Just agreeing?
Yeah, so, I don't know, it became this easy... So, for me, and it'll pop up again, Stop Where My Mom Will Shoot is such a disaster. Like, through and through. I mean, we made the joke on the episode that there's probably that one, like, production assistant or gripper or whoever's, that's just like, yeah, this is going to be great. This is my, like, but, besides that, like, every element of that movie is just so, it's a complete mess. Stallone himself has even said it.
Yeah.
So the Stallone element basically takes the cake for worst performance. However, because it's so messy, there was also that part of me that wanted to look at, something like The Specialist, I think, where it's not the worst movie, compared to, Stop or My Mom Will Shoot or Rocky V even, but I felt like that was the one where out of all of them, where he was phoning it in the most, I want to say, and so that's where I guess the two worst performances, it's like something that's so incredibly bad and versus something that's like, completely phoned in and not there at all.
Yeah.
But I guess ultimately it is Stop or My Mom Will Shoot.
So, yeah, I was kind of had similar thoughts when it came to worst Stallone performance. Rocky V's like a bad film.
Yeah.
And it's probably the worst he has portrayed Rocky, but at the same time, he's still probably the best thing in the film. Yeah. In fact, I would say he is the best thing in the film. Overall, the characters in that film are terrible. Even though I get annoyed, watching him, like the way, I know he's supposed to have kind of this brain injury and maybe he's playing up to that, but it just makes him out to be this like complete dope at times, which is, I talked about in an episode, often Rocky is shown to be like a bit slow, a little dim-witted at times, but at times in this particular outing, he's just made to look like a blithering imbecile, which I don't like. But overall, I still think Stallone's performance is pretty decent and he's still the best thing in the movie.
Yeah.
So that really leaves, the performance in Stop or My Mom Will Shoot as Joe Bombkowski and the performance in The Specialist as Ray Quick are the two laziest Stallone performances that we've covered. Stop or My Mom Will Shoot, I think it comes from the fact that he realized basically this was a terrible film and he just didn't want to be there. And you get the sense that through the performance, I do not want to be here. The Specialist, I think, is a more interesting case because I do think he wants to be there, but he's going for something and he's just failing at it, I think. Like, I think he's trying to be like sexy and brooding and doing that thing. Yeah. And doing the kind of middle distance stare thing and, trying to do that and trying to be like more of a kind of romantic lead or whatever, but he's just not pulling it off. And he, instead of looking sexy and brooding and all that, he just looks kind of bored.
Yeah.
But I think in the end, I did give the worst Stallone performance to his performance in Stop or My Mom Will Shoot because the way he sells comedy in that film is terrible. But then the script's terrible, the directing's lazy, like most of the performances are terrible. Yeah. Like you say, that whole film is a mess, which I'm sure we will talk about more.
So I know The Specialist was one where I felt, because so many of them, obviously you can recast, Stallone or recast whatever. And we've talked about that before, but I think for the most part, Stallone works in the roles. He might not be the best part. He might not be, whatever, but with The Specialist, and that's the conversation where it is the movie that didn't feel like Stallone was meant for the role. I know we talked about like it would have traditionally gone to like a Michael Douglas or somebody else, but
or somebody like a Richard Gere or something like that. Yeah, it doesn't feel like it was written for Stallone. It doesn't feel like a Stallone part at all. And I think he's trying to be that thing, like trying to do like a kind of, because Richard Gere gives there's a kind of blankness to him, but there is also like a kind of sexy charisma to that blankness for some reason. And he kind of, he can basically only do the one thing. He's quite limited as an actor as well, but he does that thing well. And I think Stallone tries to do that and it doesn't work for him. It's just not a good look for him.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, now we talk about best Stallone performance, which I'm pretty sure we're going to give the award to the same thing, but let's keep the mystery going for all of 2 seconds.
So the best performance, well, that I have is Copland. We've kind of talked about him, besides Ray Liotta being the best part. I think it is his most stretched, and yeah, while he's kind of understated and roles are not cranking at the same level that is common with the other movies, in this one it completely works, and you really feel this kind of subtlety element of it. And I mean, there is that scene in Copland, which we talk about in the episode, of him saying that line of all the good girls,
all the best girls were taken,
and it's just like so completely heartbreaking. And for a Stallone performance, which is, it's crazy. It's crazy, especially going through this whole season and seeing all that, and then having that, it's like I guess a nice cherry on a bland cake. I don't know, but I wanted to also give a shout out to Daylight, because I think, the movie's problematic, and we kind of discussed that, but I think he shows a range in Daylight that, he is the best part in that one. And it's not, the best movie, and it's not his best performance, but I was pleasantly surprised going into Daylight and seeing him.
Yeah. And in a weird way, by the way, I'm just gonna say it. Yeah, obviously, I totally agree. Sheriff Freddy in Copland also takes my award for best Stallone performance. But yes, I mean, his role as Kit Latura in Daylight, I did think about that as well, even though I think, far and away his best performance is as Sheriff Freddy in Copland. Yeah. It's a weird thing that, like, watching them kind of, like one week after the other, I was kind of struck that it feels in a way that Daylight's almost like a dry run for his performance.
Yeah.
In Copland, in that character is like way more human and way more vulnerable, and way more of like a kind of, he's not a hero. I mean, he is a hero, in his actions he's a hero, but he's not like the kind of all out action hero, and he's not kind of just like taking all the decisions himself necessarily. There's like a kind of consensus building element to the character, and it's a pretty decent character, and it's a decent performance by Stallone. And yeah, watching the two kind of back to back like that, it did make me think that, oh, he is trying to move away a little bit, and he is trying to create something different, and he does that. He dips a kind of toe into it in Daylight, and then he fully, submerges himself in Copland. And I think that performance does deserve some praise, because I think maybe we don't get the Copland performance without it in a weird way.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I know this whole season, especially as we've been referencing, watching them all back to back, and going from the 80s to now, and then with his age, I mean, throughout the whole season, we talk about this pretty regularly, but you could see him trying so hard to not be the one-man army, or not be that, very standard action hero. And throughout all the kind of fumbles and flops that happened throughout the season, he was slowly, I guess, trying to progress. And eventually, to end on Copland is a great thing. It's opposed to the Seagal season where it tanks as it goes on. We kind of get...
it just falls off a cliff, yeah.
In this season, we kind of get a shaky, gradual rise, I feel.
Yeah, there's some there's definitely more undulations in this season. There's some, highs and lows, kind of all over the place. So, and we go out on a real high, which is always good, because, kind of relating it back to Assassins, it's one of those things that if your movie is like an hour and a half, which Assassins isn't, it's longer, but I'm just using this as an example. If your movie is an hour and a half and it kind of isn't very good for an hour, but the last half hour rocks, you're going to forgive a lot of, what has gone before. But if it works the other way around and the last half hour sucks, then you have a more harsh opinion, even if on balance, the level of goodness to suckingness are the same in the two films. It just, you know, the taste in your mouth at the end is kind of what you remember. So, you know, it's good to go in at a high.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to the next worst.
The next worst. So we're actually moving away from Stallone for a little bit for the next two categories. So first up, we've got worst villain.
Yeah, so my worst villain was actually, I was trying to think of like the actual, I don't know, it ends up being Stopper My Mama Shoot. Let's just get that out of the way. But then I was trying to, again, look at other things because in Stop or My Mom Will Shoot, the villains are almost so non-existent that I didn't even know if I wanted to consider them. But I mean, I guess they're still there and they still are the villains. But yeah, it was either between that, I looked at Rocky V, or I looked at Assassins, but Antonio Banderas would be the villain in that. So I crossed that out because there is the surprise actual villain in Assassins.
Oh yeah, in the final, I suppose.
That's non-existent. I just, said, well, that doesn't count. But, so Stop or My Mom Will Shoot takes it.
Stop or My Mom Will Shoot takes it again. And unsurprisingly, even though I do have like a few runners up, Stop or My Mom Will Shoot takes it for me. So like the British actor who plays the main villain, or who's supposed to be the main villain, Parnell, is, an actor called Roger Rees, who was also, like, as we discussed in the episode, also famous for playing the Sheriff of Rottingham in Robin Hood, Men in Tights. Prince in Tights? I'm just confusing the two titles together.
It's the Mel Brooks one with Kevin Costner.
The Kevin Costner one, yes. Yeah. That's another case of, like, you know, we talk a lot about it in the Stallone films that we've watched, you know, like, when we ever cover that particular film, that is another one where the lead hero is one of the least interesting things in the movie.
Yes.
But this is not the Robin Hood Prince of Thieves episode. So yeah, even though he's not on screen much, Parnell is such a useless villain that he still has to be the worst villain. I mean, you forget about him for most of the film. He only really turns up before the finale, he really only turns up on like maybe 2 or 3 scenes, and not long scenes, but yeah, he just comes across as pathetic, and you're just like, oh, why? Yeah, this is not a great villain. Like, what are you doing? You know, you're definitely not gonna win this film. You know, you're up against fucking apparently Super Cop, but like Super Cop at the same time, you know, like nagged by his mum, you know, whatever.
Which there was a part of me that wanted to try, it's a horrible argument, it wouldn't work at all, but wanted to try and argue that his mom was actually the villain.
Well, I mean, apparently in the original script, it was like a darker thing, and like his mom was more of a villain. I do want to give also, even though, yes, that is my worst villain, I want to give special mention to the kind of co-villains in Rocky V. Of Tommy, played by the boxer Tommy Morrison, and George W. Duke, played by the actor Richard Gant, who is just like a Don King ripoff. They are also terrible. And one other special mention must go to, I feel, the character of Joseph Joe Leone, played by Ron Steiger in The Specialist, because, as we discussed in the episode, one of the worst Latin American, we don't know what he's going for. I can only broadly say Latin American because I do not know what accent Rod Steiger was trying to do. So I cannot say he was trying to do something from a South American country, or if he's trying to do something from Cuba, or he's trying to do something from Mexico, or Puerto Rico. Don't have a fucking clue, because one of the worst Latin American accents ever committed to celluloid. Yeah. So I feel that Rod Steiger deserves a mention here.
Yes.
I mean, what was he doing? I mean, it was a choice. It was a bizarre choice.
If you listen to the episode, we will go in much more detail.
Yes, we will talk much further about that accent. But we roll on to better times, because now we talk about best villain.
Yeah, so for me, it's kind of, there were 3 high contenders. I have, I guess, in third place, or the second runner-up, would be Antonio Banderas in Assassins. I think he is great. He's fun. His kind of getting beaten and bruised and all that. But he lost spot lost a place in his, official second runner-up, because in the halfway mark of Assassins, he's basically forgotten until the end, which is a shame, because he's one of the best he is the best.
He is, for sure. He acts his socks off in that movie.
Yeah. And so it became a tie between Armand and Santi, but ultimately who takes the cake is Wesley Snipes in Demolition Man. Is just perfect villain. I don't know how to explain it. The level of theatrics, everything about it is just...
Yeah. I was kind of working around the same territory. I also love Antonio Banderas' performance in Assassins. Armand Assante's performance in Judge Dredd is just off the chain nuts, and I love it for that. He is by far the best thing in Judge Dredd, and he makes it, he's one of the things that makes it a watchable movie. That and the production design. The production design is absolutely amazing in that movie. It really brings Mega City 1 to life. And then, so those 2. And I also want to give a shout out to, it's kind of a cheat, but I want to give a shout out to the gang in Cliffhanger. Like, I think it'd be unfair to name Eric Quaylen, the villain played by John Lithgow, as the, best villain, because, he's not, him by himself, I don't think he's an amazing villain. I think John Lithgow's pretty good in the part, but what makes it really good, what makes those villains really fun, is him and his gang. So particularly the kind of core members, Kinnett, played by Leon, Christelle, played by Caroline Goodall, Delmar, played by Craig Fairbass, and Richard Travers, played by Rex Lynn. I think just their constant bickering and the kind of cutthroat nature of that gang is so fun to watch, and one of the most entertaining elements of that film. So I feel the whole gang of mercenaries deserve a shout out, a special mention.
Yeah, agreed.
But in the end, also I went for Simon Phoenix, played by Wesley Snipes in Demolition Man, because oh my god, he is so fun. And from the very first moment you see him on screen here, and his dye job, and he's wearing fucking MC Hammer parachute pants, and he got, it's dungaree things, and then and he's just chewing up the scenery, and he's so fun. And just throughout the movie he is laugh a minute, and you just don't want and his action scenes are pretty good as well, that scene where the really funny scene where the cops are they've got the kind of app that's trying to tell them how to deal with a violent criminal, and then he just beats fuck out of them.
Yeah. He's making commentary the whole time. He's surprised about it.
And it's accompanied by those record scratches, those random so he's so fun throughout, and the action scenes that he does is really good, and when he gets the gun at the museum, and his joy of getting this rail gun, and this annoyance of the fact that it has to charge up for a really long time, and just everything Wesley Snipes does in that movie is so fun.
Yeah. And that was actually, so for those that listen to the Seagal season, there was an ongoing joke at my expense creating a fake, or, creating the movie that I'd want to see, basically,
Yeah.
or, you know, and I know
Usually
that
based around the villains.
yeah, and Demolition Man was where it flopped, and you actually did it, where you said that Spartan was almost non-existent, and you want a movie more of Simon and Sandra Bullock's character. I can't think of her name right.
No, I can't remember her name right now either,
Yeah.
actually. I will, you will, if you could filibuster, and I'll quickly look up online, you know, very slyly.
Yes.
The audience will never notice, my typing away here. So,
so I remember that, yeah, you were having this whole discussion about watching it and, you know, viewing it as, like, it'd be more interesting if this criminal came, you know, from the past in this world that we've established and we kind of really establish in Demolition Man in the beginning, but then have her almost trying to, this cop that doesn't understand the violence or anything, then trying to basically learn and become, you know, like this old school rough and tough cop, which her character ends up falling into the same action trope as many other, you know, women characters, where they're great and they're smart and whatever it may be, and then they just kind of fall to the wayside and become dumber or be taken hostage or whatever.
Yeah, because he knocks her out before the finale. But yeah, on that, you know, I was kind of jumping off from the bit just before the finale where she like beats a guy up and he's like, "Oh, where did you learn those moves?" And she says like Jackie Chan movies. And then I thought like, oh, that could have been like a fun way to tell the story, or maybe she hadn't learned any moves, you know, but like then she looks back in these files and you know, sees video of like these kind of old school cops, and then maybe you get a montage of her watching Jackie Chan movies, and then she goes up against Wesley Snipes in the end. I think it, you know, it could have been, I mean, it's still a great movie, but I think it would have been a fun, interesting, possible route to go down. As well. And her character, as we all very clearly remember, is Lieutenant Lenina Huxley.
Okay, I knew it was something, the Lee part at the end. I was like, is it Luxley? What? It's something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And as we all know, the character was named after Aldous Huxley, the author of Brave New World, which was one of the inspirations behind the movie part.
So now we get into...
Well, we're on to So we're really steaming ahead. We've only got 2 awards to give out now. So it's now worst film, and I'm sure you're going to really surprise us with your worst film.
My worst film is Copland. No, it's...
Wow! You did really surprise me. Holy hell. There was one movie I thought you were going to say, but that definitely wasn't it.
So the one that I've been hinting at and very clearly even stated earlier on.
I think we've probably stated it a bunch of times in the other awards that we've given to this particular film. I don't think there's a lot of mystery going on here. But anyway, drum roll. What's your worst film, Craig?
Stop or My Mom Will Shoot. And
God.
I tried so hard to think, well, maybe, you know, I looked at Rocky V or stuff like that, but it's just, there's no comparison. Like, there's no way that I could kind of fudge the numbers or whatever to put it in, you know, it leaps and bounds is Stop or My Mom Will Shoot.
Yes, yeah. And unsurprisingly, my worst film also Stop or My Mom Will Shoot. My runner-up is probably Rocky V, just because that film annoys me, because like I feel like it fucks with the Rocky legacy, and I think it's the real weak link. You know, if you watch the first, I mean, I suppose the Creed movies are slightly separate. So if you watch the, you know, the 6, you know, Rocky movies of the initial saga, if you want to call it that, you know, like the kind of Creed movies are maybe on the side. So yeah, if you watch them, if you watch those 6 films, like they're all watchable, they're all entertaining. You know, some of them aren't like necessarily super good. Like obviously the first Rocky is a great movie that has great drama and great characters and great action. And, you know, and then you've got something like Rocky IV that's just pure popcorn. It's not necessarily great, doesn't have a particularly good script, has a very silly story. You know, it's not grounded at all, but Stallone beats communism. It's very funny. It's a very entertaining movie. You've got Dolph Lundgren pretending to be a Russian. It's all good. It also has possibly the greatest montage of all time. It's a fun time. And all of them, and there's just this Rocky 5. It's just there. And if you want to rewatch the franchise, you're just like, I don't want to rewatch that. I'm happy to rewatch the rest of them. Perfect. Yeah. They're all good. They're all fun. Great movies. But so it annoys me. But that being said, and then I suppose, also The Specialist isn't that great. But again, the Specialist
Woods.
The Specialist has James Woods, who, is, I don't want to give too much credit to because he's an asshole, but, he is really fun in that movie. And then, as an actor, he knows how to do it. As a person, ugh. Anyway, yeah, it's Stop or My Mom Would Shoot. It's a terrible film. It's terrible on every level. The acting is awful. The script is awful. The action set pieces are lazy. The comedy is generic and stupid, and just it's boring. Everything about it fails. It fails on literally every, cinematography is bland, every level that you can think of, this movie fails on. And it's definitely the worst movie.
Though I will say it has the one, and it's not even redeeming quality, it's just one kind of quality, is the dream sequence that is just so utterly bizarre and dumb, but it just,
Yeah, I suppose it's not necessarily a redeeming quality, but it is just like, well, that's something I've seen in my life.
Yeah.
Stallone in a diaper. Didn't think I'd see that ever, but sure. Thanks, movie. Thanks for giving me that image in my life.
Yeah.
So yeah, like you say, not necessarily a redeeming quality, but certainly something memorable in the movie. Basically the only memorable thing in the movie.
Yeah. And now we get to move on.
Yes, now we get to talk about things we like. That's what we want to do here. We want to talk about things we like. So best film, or basically best film in your opinion, basically it's favorite film really,
So this is a so Demolition Man was up for it, but ultimately I have two best films, and listening to the episodes, it'll be very clear, but I love Copland, might be one of my most watched Stallone movies. We do talk about in the episode that there are a lot of issues when actually going through scene by scene, but there is so much potential to it. Stallone's best performance, however, for the sake of favorite film, something that I ended up choosing Cliffhanger, which I don't know. I think it's that one for me that's really nostalgic, where I'm not even really that big of a nostalgia person, but I watched that a lot when I was a kid. I like the element of, I'm a big fan of stuff taking place in the snow. It has some great kind of set pieces, and there's a lot, especially going through on this podcast, I wish they added more to, especially with the girlfriend character who is so amazing in the beginning, and then she just kind of
falls off a cliff at the Not literally. That happens to somebody else, but that happens to a few people. Yeah. But not her, but metaphorically, her character falls off.
But I guess I picked that one. But it was between that and Demolition Man in terms of the ones I had the most fun with and just really enjoyed and would watch a ton.
So I think we both very much agree that this season had 3 real high points, and those 3 real high points were Cliffhanger, which I think is probably the most excited we've sounded in a podcast recording, because we had just gone through this phase of for my other podcast, for the Guilty Pleasures podcast, which is a kind of sideshow, a kind of spin-off to my other podcast, the New Horror Express. We had recorded an episode of House of the Dead. We had recorded those first 2 episodes of this season. We were talking about Rocky 5 and talking about Stop or My Mom Will Shoot. So I
back
think
to back. So it was 3 weeks of that.
There was like 3 weeks of that, so we had Rocky 5, we had House of the Dead, we had Superman shoot. I think we were going to lose our minds. So like we must sound, I love, I'm going to probably, when I put it up, I'll listen back to it. I think it's like the most pumped we've probably sounded because it was just such a relief to be talking about a movie that we both like, that we both have nostalgia for. So yeah, Cliffhanger, one of the high points. The other two high points, obviously, Copland, Demolition Man. So it was difficult to kind of pick between those three films, but in the end, for me, as much as I did watch Cliffhanger a bunch as a kid, and as much as I think Copland is a really good film that could have been an even better film with some tweaks, I think I went for Demolition Man in the end because Demolition Man is very much the movie, probably even more than Cliffhanger, that I watched a lot as a kid. And I think Demolition Man is the movie, the Stallone movie I've seen the most outside of Rocky.
Yeah.
Outside of the kind of Rocky films. So yes. So it has a special place in my heart. And I just, Stallone is good in it. Like I kind of like did my thing of like recasting the film and doing all that. But Stallone is good in it. I do like his character of John Spartan. I think he is overshadowed by Sandra Bullock and Wesley Snipes, but it's good. And even though, as we talked about in the episode, some of the world building doesn't make sense because we do not know how far this supposedly surface level utopian society goes to, does it extend beyond California? Like what is, what are the rules? Like, we got into that. There's a whole bunch of questions that you're going to kind of ask about it. And there's also the thing of like the satire is kind of hit and miss, and it's kind of like, oh, what side of the fence is it on? And you can see why like the kind of Fox News crowd kind of gravitate towards it because of certain elements in the film, even though there's like that kind of last minute fudge of like, can't we all get along? So there's things, but it's a real fun movie. It does do a lot of great world building to begin with. There is like a 20-minute section where like Stallone is basically not on screen and we're just following Sandra Bullock, and it does a real great job of establishing what this world is like, what the society is like, how it works. And there's a lot of great meta gags in it. The thing about like President Schwarzenegger, the thing about the franchise wars and Taco Bell ruling the world and, like all that stuff. And, I can't say it enough that Wesley Snipes' performance entertains the hell out of me. So does Sandra Bullock. The action scenes are good. I think it's probably the most quotable of any of the movies we watched, even down to like little tiny scenes, like the thing with the news reporter where there's the news reporter quizzing Stallone, being like, do you think it's justified, blowing up the $7 million mall for this little girl who only had a $25,000 reward in her head? And the little girl just turns around and goes, hey, fuck you, lady.
Yeah.
It's one of the funniest moments in the movie. Just, that movie entertains me so much. And I think it's heightened by the nostalgia I have on it, having it on video and stuff like that. So best film for me, Demolition Man.
And I agree. I think it's great. And I think that it definitely is one of those where despite all of its flaws, the certain actors or the certain set pieces or whatever it may be are so heightened that more than the other films, it erases the good outweighs the bad instead of
for sure. Ones, you forgive it a bunch of things because you rollick on to the next really fun action sex piece and or the next one liner or the next kind of meta gag about something or the next kind of weird bit of world building, the things with three seashells. There's so many kind of standout memorable moments in that movie that, you let a lot of the kind of negative things kind of slide in the end.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's it. That's us got it in the bag. That's us covered all of 90s Stallone. That's us kind of dissected everything. Do you want to give any kind of final thoughts on 90s Stallone before we close this season out and never talk about Stallone again? Apart from the times we probably will in tangents in other episodes about other action stars. But apart from that, never talking about him again.
So as like rough of a ride that 90s Stallone can be, with the highs and lows, and it's just all over the place. I have to give a lot of credit because I think the 90s is the only period of Stallone where like he was willing to experiment and trying to like branch out. And so I feel, besides what he was doing in like the early 70s before, he became the one-man, or the 70s before he became the one-man army with Rambo or even Rocky or whatever it may be. Or then after the 90s when he was trying to go back into just being an action star. And so, yeah, this was interesting to kind of take out of his whole career to see like him trying to experiment. And so I give a lot of credit, I guess, for 90s Stallone.
I'm going to absolutely agree with you. I think this is a really interesting period of his career, and even some of the bad movies, even something like The Specialist, which I don't really like, there's a lot of boring stuff in the Specialist, but there's some fun stuff. Some of the bombs are fun. James Wood's performance is fun, and there's interesting stuff here. And I think that, he had a couple of flops in the late 80s. I think his ego, for once, it was a little bit dented. Mm-hmm. So he was just trying shit. He obviously didn't seem to clearly know who he was. I mean, I think obviously, he really gets his identity back in like 2006 with Rocky Balboa, and then 2008 you've got Rambo, 2010 you've got Expendables and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, okay, this is who I am. I'm going to play to this audience. I'm clearly identified. That's it. But, he kind of lost his audience for a while in the 90s. He wasn't sure. He was like, shall I become, more family friendly and comedic? And then we didn't cover Oscar, but, he tried to do that with the likes of Oscar and Stop or My Mom Will Shoot. And then it's like, oh, well, that's not really working. Well, I try to be more kind of down to earth, broody, charismatic, which, you see that in The Specialist and Assassins, and then it's like, oh, no, that doesn't really work. It doesn't really work, even though The Specialist was actually a box office hit.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, that doesn't really work for me, and then he struck out on trying to be like a comic book superhero, but then, comic book movies in the 90s generally weren't that great. And then and then there was this, a turn again, he's like, well, the broody thing didn't work, the comedic thing didn't really work, and like, what else is there? And it's like, like with Daylight and Cop One, it's like, I'm going to be these kind of hero characters, but like much more vulnerable, much more human, much more flawed versions of those. And, and it's, I think it's interesting to kind of map that out and just kind of, kind of throwing shit at the wall and just being like, is this going to stick? And it kind of did with, obviously Cliffhanger was a big success, Demolition Man was a big success, and then it kind of dipped down again. Obviously, The Specialist was a massive critical failure. Although, I will say again, I think it's kind of remembered as being a flop now, but as we discovered in the research, actually a pretty decent sized hit, and his second most successful film at the box office, in the 90s. So it's kind of weird, but that is true. And so I think it's, as much as it's had lows, I think nearly every film has had interesting things in it. I think it did start particularly rough because like Rocky V doesn't have a lot of interesting things, and Stop or My Mom Will Shoot has no interesting things. But even some of the weaker films, even the mixed bag films, they have interesting things. He's trying different things. So I think it's been a fascinating season for me to kind of look back on this particular period of his career, because his ego wasn't riding high, and he took chances. A lot of them failed, but he definitely took chances. But I think that's pretty much all on Stallone, right?
Yes, that's all I have.
Okay, so lastly, before we head on out, just tell the audience, as normal, where they can hit you up on social media.
Yeah, you can just search on social media, on Twitter or Instagram, Craig Dram, Draheim, and I also am one of the co-hosts of Bloodhound Pick, which is PIX, where we talk about obscure and independent horror movies that are older or, well, from either a couple years ago to decades ago. And then we'll highlight kind of independent members of the horror community, from other reviewers to professionals. And yeah, it's just all about kind of bringing attention to kind of the independent world of horror. And sometimes we stretch out to, thriller, sci-fi, dark action, stuff like that as well. But yeah, so either of those two are the best ways to find me.
And so it just leaves me to say thank you very much for listening, to all those listening. That's all from me. That's all from Craig. If you do have any thoughts, kind of feedback, whatever, you can rate, review, and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, anywhere you listen to podcasts. Make sure those reviews are 5 stars, please, because basically the algorithm thinks we're terrible if we're not. So we know we're not terrible. So 5 stars. Just make it 5 stars. If you're thinking anything less, don't do it. Just walk away. Anyway, until next time, see ya.